why is it legal for there to be any commerce at all in your or my personal financial transaction data? Why should there be any commerce at all in our location data? Why should there be any commerce in our health data?
So you'd think a law that said you're not allowed to collect the GPS data and sell it to other people or use it in any way.
Well, I would say, like, take Uber, right?
Yeah.
There's an obvious necessity for them having it, but they should have to destroy it the minute the ride is done. And the ride should price in the real cost of the ride. This notion that they're going to appear to give you a deal where the real thing is that they're going to profit from manipulating you later, it's that there's a dishonesty to that. Yeah. I think we need to get the economy back to pricing things according to what's really going on, because otherwise you're going to wake up one day and it'll be too late, and then people find that they're on this, they're on the street with all the homeless people because they had a health problem. They're not in a position to cover it because their insurance has been taken away because somebody figured out they were sick before they did and undercut them, right? Crazy. And so there are all these weaknesses, and I think the tech industry should be able to solve all of them. And right now, if you're an entrepreneur and you've had this experience yourself, you're at the mercy of what Google and Facebook and Amazon and Microsoft will let you do.
Yeah.
Right? And, there are lots of companies who've had really promising starts only to discover that their capital dries up, or, Google suddenly is doing...
Yeah, shifts the algorithm.
Has switched the algorithm to take away.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there going, that's wrong. And what I'd like to do is just to recognize that Google and Facebook and Microsoft and Amazon can have a great business without harming people. And I would like to believe that the management teams are up to that task, but failing that, and obviously they haven't done it yet, I think we have to change the incentives. And California has a proposed bill that would give a right of independent legal action to all consumers. So it would end the practice in terms of service that said you have to go to arbitration, and say if you feel you've been harmed, you can sue for damages. That is a wonderful, wonderful idea. And I want it in its most pure, clean, unadulterated way. Any situation, anytime. And I like to have the opportunity for state AGs to be able to view some of these things as criminal, because some of these things really are criminal.
Yeah.
And the reason is not because I want to punish anybody, but I want to change the incentives. I want to give these companies a genuine reason to reform. Yeah. It's just like what happened with chemicals. For the first 50 years of the chemical industry, chemical companies would just dump the residue of their process, whether it's mercury or chrome or whatever, in fresh water or on the side of the road. And by the 70s, the country was so polluted, you couldn't see, you couldn't breathe, and you get cancer really early because it was everywhere. And eventually the country said, wait a minute, that's terrible. We're going to make the people who created the problem pay for it. I think we have to recognize that there are the equivalent of digital spills that are toxic, and that the people who create them have to pay for them. And right now they get to walk. Their margins are artificially high because they aren't paying the cost of the damage that they do. And I look at this and I go, so on the one hand, I want to end some practices, because I think if we end the trade in those data, location, health, and financial, then we can have a debate about what are the circumstances where it's legit.
Right.
And
so by default, the default matters. If by default you can't use the GPS data for commerce unless the person explicitly says it, and then, hey, we're going to get rid of it after a year, whatever the window is to get a refund.
First we ban it, and then we have the conversation, okay? And the reason was otherwise we've run that experiment with global data protection regulation in Europe. If you start from today's thing and then move off of there, it's too easy for these guys to control the experiment and persuade people not to.
The counter argument would be you're going to slow down the pace of technology and innovation, and it's going to cost customers money.
No, and my simple response to that is nonsense. What you're going to do is redirect it. Okay? I mean, we're going to redirect in fact, I would argue these guys are killing innovation, right? I mean, they're stopping it anywhere near them. And Google's got this bright, shining light in Google Ventures going, hey, we like blockchain, and we like, things your parents used to do for you, and we like, transportation. So they've taken all the money away from the core of the internet and brought into these things that are more capital intensive, take longer. And, Google buys enough stuff to keep the venture guys happy and then writes them off, right? Go look at the history of their stuff. Yeah. It's brilliant. I mean, these guys really are smarter, okay? But it's not good for the country. And here's the thing.
So regulation is the solution here.
Well, part of the solution. Yeah. politics is a huge part of it. And think about antitrust. Antitrust in technology is the greatest thing that ever happened. In 1956, the first antitrust action in what we think of as the technology market, AT&T consent decree does two things. AT&T agreed to do what the telegraph company did when AT&T was created, which is to restrict itself to its existing telecom market. That allowed IBM and Control Data to create a separate digital computer industry in 1956. That's where the computer industry comes from. What was the other thing? They agreed to license their entire patent portfolio at no cost. The most important thing in there was the transistor. Silicon Valley exists because of that. Okay. Then came the IBM case. The result of that was to create an independent software industry, right, by ending the lock-in on the IBM operating system, and it created personal computers. Then comes the second then comes Carter Phone, which basically gets the AT&T telecom hardware into the public domain so people could make telephones and stuff like that.
You don't pick from 3 at the phone store.
And then you go to the AT&T breakup, which brings cellular forward like 10 years, and I don't even know how much it brought broadband data, but they weren't even thinking about broadband data, and that became a big deal. And then Microsoft, which leads to the internet. And here's the punchline. Every one of the target companies, so AT&T several times, IBM, Microsoft, went to all-time highs for years after the thing. And the country...
Because?
Well, because the business they were left with was still incredibly attractive.
And the tide rose for everything else.
And yet we created whole new industries.
Yeah.
And my point here is...
Which they got to participate in and had a pole position on.
Well, in some cases, right? In AT&T, they couldn't participate in computers, right? But
in Microsoft's case, they could participate in the internet.
They did. So we've been nicer to Microsoft than we were to some of the... And IBM participated in PCs, obviously. Right, So at the end of the day, my simple observation here is I'm incredibly pro-tech and pro-growth. I just think we're in a place we've been before. These guys are the new robber barons, right? Yeah. They've defined a world that suits them. And I think when you study it economically, you see that they behave the way monopolists behave, not because they're bad people, but because the economic imperatives of monopoly are that you restrict innovation and you restrict, all kinds of things. And I think the country's better served when we have rampant entrepreneurship and we have rampant growth. And these guys are preventing that from happening.